Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Jennifer Goldsack. She is the Executive Director of the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME for short. Jennifer, thanks for joining me today.
Nick, thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness, listen to those dulcet tones. It's going to be confusing. They won't be able to separate us. I always get that.
There'll still be one giveaway.
That's true. Obviously, you hail from similar parts as I do, but for the benefit of the listeners, tell us a little bit about your background. It's pretty unique, pretty interesting. Tell us how you got to this point in your career.
Nick, I'd be happy to. So yes, I was brought up in London. My dad's English, but my mother's American. So I actually moved to the States a long time ago now. I thought I'd come for 1 year, compete in the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and then leave and go back to England. And I came. I did indeed. I was very lucky. Did compete in the 2008 Olympics. I was a rower for the US. And really quite enjoyed the US, and so I stayed. And it was interesting. I think a lot of athletes who retire from sport, Nick, struggle to find meaning in a next career. And for me, I felt really lucky. I had moved to Philly, and I started working at University of Pennsylvania at the hospital there. I did outcomes research and then moved across to what was healthcare delivery science. Moved down to Delaware, co-founded a pragmatic research institute. And, think about the timing. It was during health reform. It felt very important. And as a Brit over here in the US, it was such a different system. And I felt quite passionately that it could be better. Still feel that way. That was my sort of inroad. And it was a tremendous way actually to transition away from being an athlete, and then met my husband, which was probably another reason I wound up staying. Moved down to Florida of all places, and started working remotely for an organization called the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. For folks who don't know Citi, they are a public-private partnership co-founded by Duke and FDA, and so I had moved at that point to the clinical trial side, and just when I turned up, FDA had asked them to try and figure out why no one was using mobile technologies in clinical trials. And I was the new person, so that fell to me. And as with all of these things in life, that was a tremendous and happy accident for me. It was a privilege to lead a lot of that work. And that's where I really came to understand the power of technology and solving a lot of the problems I see, and I think we all see around healthcare, and how we can do better at supporting patients, how we can hopefully help clinicians as well. I think they're having a rough time now, how we can improve health as well as healthcare, and how we can try and make some cost savings. And that was really where, along with some colleagues I'd met along the way, we decided that we would found the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. And Nick, we ended up launching in May of this year, so May 2019.
So it's a brand new activity, and to be clear, one of the great things listening to you is how much you compress into a very short period of time, not just in your activities, but in terms of your introduction. There's lots to unpack there, to be clear. Olympic athlete. I mean, that's rarefied air, to be clear. Not many people attain those levels. And before we dive into the digital medicine area, which I know you have a passion, and I certainly do as well. I'm interested to know how much that sort of impacts or influences the way that you see the world, the way that you see medicine, even. Is that really formative as part of your sort of life experiences to contribute when you went through that whole experience of competing and in this incredible domain where you sit?
Nick, for many reasons, as I sort of reflect on that experience, I feel very lucky, and certainly I absolutely draw a lot on what I learned through those years, sort of competing at that highest level. The things that feel most salient are not being afraid when things are hard, and in fact, the most challenging endeavors are the ones that appeal the most. And I think a lot of the work, when we think about the collective work we need to do to try and improve health and healthcare, and especially introducing these technologies where there are so many challenges but so much promise, I'm drawn to it like a moth to the flame. And a lot of these things as well, it's just, how do you eat the elephant? Bite at a time, right? And that was,
Right.
something else I think you learn as an athlete. You don't think about the 4 years you have until the next Olympic Games. You think about the opportunity you have in the training session right in front of you. And you also realize you can't do it by yourself. It's about being part of a team, part of a community. And I think that that's something that, well, there's also the pig-headed, stubborn part of being an athlete. There's also the tremendous value you place on pursuing something collectively.
And it's interesting you talk about that. I mean, I'm always trying to pull out the sort of threads of, the small things. And whilst it's not a small thing, that not being afraid, I think, is key sort of incremental step that other people can take that says, you know what, and the quote I always remember related, I'm sure it was a soccer one, was, you miss every one of the shots that you don't take. And that's about that fear. We tend to sort of, oh my goodness, I might fail. Whereas, part of this is, who cares? So what? Failure is actually part of what makes us successful, but that's very hard to sort of imagine. So I'm delighted to hear you say that. And then the team and the community aspect, I hear that's a recurrent theme. So you obviously navigated through all these sort of different areas, ending up in clinical trials, and timing wise, that was as these devices started to arrive. But what was the genesis of the Digital Medicine Society? What pushed you to sort of create that? You met some people, and we come across it, but what pushed you over the edge, as it were?
Well, there's probably a long list of reasons why I was pushed over the edge, Nick. But thinking specifically about Dime, it was just over a year ago, beginning of November 2018, that a few of us started, sort of the co-founders started kicking the tires on this idea. And I was very fortunate, from sort of previous work on the healthcare delivery side, and then the work I did at City on the trial side, to have that sort of intersectional sort of community of clinical experts. And we felt pretty strongly that the use of digital tools and big data in healthcare and clinical trials could be incredibly powerful, but that there was a lot of confusion about how to advance this. And what we also realized, Nick, was digital medicine, as we define it, and we can get to that, is, I think, the most interdisciplinary field you could imagine, from sort of cybersecurity experts to citizen scientists, from clinicians to regulators, from payers to ethicists, to every flavor of engineer and mathematician under the sun. And what became apparent was there wasn't a professional home where all of those individuals could come together, and certainly not sort of straddling both care delivery and clinical trials. And frankly, the better we can pool and share our knowledge and pull things from trials through to care delivery and go the other way as well, the better it's going to be. When one of my colleagues proposed the idea of a professional society, I distinctly remember, and will never forget, being very clear that I thought it was the worst idea I'd ever heard, and that the last thing the world needed is another professional society. And so my reaction, and I told you before, or alluded to being quite stubborn and determined, well, surely someone else has done this, so let's just go out and find it and help, because God knows we don't want to found it. So, fast forward a brief period of time, there wasn't anyone else that had that interdisciplinary home. There are tremendous organizations out there, City, my sort of erstwhile colleagues there being one of them, lots of other organizations on the sort of cybersecurity side, perhaps look at particular elements on the trial side, on the care delivery side, or carve out particular stakeholder groups that they support in doing this work. But there wasn't that single professional home that brought everyone together. And that was what we had in mind when we set out to establish the Digital Medicine Society.
So it's interesting that you say worst idea ever, because again, a recurrent theme from incremental steps and learning points that I get throughout these shows is that the first idea should always be seen as the sacrificial lamb. It's, ready to be discarded. And whilst you didn't discard it, it was really it was because you thought there was pre-existing versions of this, and then discovering that there wasn't, you go, well, that's cool. Now, since you opened the door, go ahead, yeah.
And the other piece I'd say there is it forced me as well to unpack why I had such a negative reaction to this idea of a professional society. And I think it's because perhaps some of the more traditional ones are viewed as being, for want of a better expression, a bit of an old boys club. And that's not to say they haven't been incredibly impactful over time, but how could we develop quickly a vibrant community that was really committed to action today and welcomed everyone and wasn't intended by any stretch of the imagination to be exclusive? And those are things I didn't realize until I had, like an idiot, declared this is a terrible idea, only having to walk it back and really rethink it. So that, I think, was a powerful part of our evolution too. Why did a few of us have that reaction to the idea of a professional society, where in fact, as you build a new field, it's really important.
Right, and I think that the aspect of the rejection of the sort of pre-existing forms is again part of that to create something that is all welcoming. I think is really the purpose of the Dime Society. I want to go back because you opened the door to defining digital medicine, and since you said that, do you think you can? I mean, I would struggle, but since you're the executive director of Dime, what do you think digital medicine is?
So this was really important. We actually brought together a strategic advisory board of all those different disciplines, even before we launched, and spent a lot of time hammering on this. And I think there are three critical pieces of the definition. So first, it's high quality hardware and software. And I think that's really important. So we are specifically thinking about the use of sort of sensor-based tools for and the software and the algorithms that support them. Typically, and increasingly so, those that are connected to the internet and used during activities of daily living. The other piece that's really important is the idea that they're evidence-based. And that is how I think we would distinguish ourselves at some level from what I think has become a very, very broad definition, so broad that perhaps sometimes it's not useful, which is digital health, right? So you can go to the App Store right now and you can find hundreds of thousands of different apps. And we exist in this sort of era of caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. We want to see evidence of sort of efficacy and safety. Doesn't mean it needs to necessarily be a medical device, but the difference between a product being, I think, a digital health or a digital medicine product is that layer of evidence. And then the third prong to the definition being those high quality hardware and software, evidence-based tools that are intended to either measure health or intervene in health. And so a subset of digital medicine is what a lot of people describe as digital therapeutics. And for digital therapeutics, it's the software itself that's the intervention. It's not an adherence tool that's helping us realize whether you've taken a drug. It's not a digital biomarker, for example. It's actually where the software itself is the intervention. That's your digital therapeutic. So to visualize it, if you imagine this very broad sort of sphere of digital health, and then within that, you have those sensor tools that are evidence-based, that's digital medicine. And then within that, you have your digital therapeutics, where the software is the intervention.
Fantastic. I think possibly one of the clearest definitions I've heard, and one that I know I'm going to reuse, and we'll be sure and sort of include this in some of the show notes, because I think it's important differentiation specifically from digital health. I think we all struggle with that because that's a sort of generalized term, but as you rightly point out, there is no validation, or at least not consistent validation in those applications. So you go ahead.
Nick, to add to that, if I can, it's not to discount out of hand digital health, and that's really important too. There's a place for these tools, and in fact, 21st Century Cures Act here in the US, if that's what we're thinking about, would place things like an electronic health record or telemedicine as digital health. critically important tools, and ones that I hope to leverage and lean on as we develop digital medicine alongside. And what was really nice, to plug some of my colleagues, we launched the Digital Medicine Society with that definition of digital medicine. And one of the things, going back to this idea of working collectively and working as a team, Nick, just a week or so ago now, in collaboration with our colleagues at the Digital Therapeutics Alliance at Node Health and Health Excel, we actually put out a framework that goes into that definition in more detail, and we co-developed it and co-released it. And I think as we think about being stewards of this rapidly progressing field, having different organizations who are tackling different aspects of it, standing shoulder to shoulder and being clear in the definitions and consistent, is going to be really important.
Yeah, so I think important points. For those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Jennifer Goldsack. She's the Executive Director of the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME for short. We were just talking about the definition of digital medicine, the difference between digital health. And, one of the things that I think is important to understand is, or at least I imagine people would say is, well, okay, so what gives you the right to define this? Where's your sort of position, not you individually, but the DIME society? How do you validate that so that you get as much consensus? I mean, the reality of everybody agreeing is almost an impossible task these days, but at least a consensus where the majority say, no, that's the right definition, it's an appropriate, and I can sign up to that. How have you approached that?
Nick, you actually teed me up to answer this question quite well early on. It's that idea of not being afraid to fail. It's probably not going to be perfect forever. Technology is developing really quickly. We might think about this very differently in 6 years or even 6 months. But standing around wringing our hands saying, oh, this is really hard, we're not going to do it, doesn't actually help people have a conversation, right, with a new product and engineering team coming out of a sort of Silicon Valley startup that says, I have this idea. It was based off me watching my grandfather have this terrible experience. I can develop it. How on earth do I take it to market? Being able to distinguish the sort of product that it is and the sort of evidence it requires is really important. It then also opens the door to them walking into a meeting with a drug sponsor or a health plan or a healthcare system and saying, this is the kind of product it is, and people aren't talking at cross purposes. So, the chances are some people think I'm stupid and it's the worst definition they've ever heard. But we asked a lot of people, we involved a lot of people, we threw down a best effort. And if you want to offer up a better one, I am all ears, because it will change. But for now, I encourage us all to rally around it and use it until it doesn't work anymore, and then we'll revisit it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great strategy, particularly in this, not just in digital medicine, but in digital in general. The speed of change is so rapid at this point that we have a hard time keeping up. And I think you're right. This sort of, well, I'm just going to fail, so therefore I'm not going to bother, it's just not a strategy that's ever going to work in this environment. Although traditionally that's what we were used to. No, we won't release it until you do. So I love that. I think that's great learning point for companies and people's trying to sort of succeed in this rapidly changing environment. So tell us a little bit about it. What does it do? Who's it made up of? What is the Digital Medicine Society, and how do people go about getting involved and participating?
Happy to discuss that, Nick. So I think I gave you a laundry list of all the different disciplines that we welcome, and I'm really proud that we're almost exactly 6 months in now. We have over 800 members worldwide, 24 different countries represented, and we do have representation from all of those different disciplines that comprise the field. That we tried to be very intentional there. We tried to have a very diverse sort of advisory board and scientific leadership board, such that when folks came to the table, if they heard of us, they would recognize someone who sort of looked like themselves. And that was important to us in building the community. The reason we exist is to advance the use of digital medicine to optimize health. Very broad. And at this time, and this may change over time, but currently we're sort of running a three-pronged strategy, Nick, to try and achieve that goal. The first is around sort of evidence generation. So For example, we've now said that the way that we define a digital medicine product, as opposed to a sensor-based digital health product, is the presence of evidence. Well, that's great. What kind of evidence? What
Mm-hmm.
is the level of evidence we need to be confident that these tools that we're being asked to place our trust in are indeed trustworthy? And I think that comes in the form of actual sort of, engineering evidence, scientific evidence, clinical evidence, but also what are the ethical considerations? Have we thought about whether these tools are actually secure? They're all connected to the internet out there, right? There's lots of different issues. So we're working very hard and already have I think 7 published manuscripts from work we've done. We don't have a writer. We are doing that work. The community is doing that. More in press and more work groups going on. The second piece is communication and education. If we imagine DIME, the Digital Medicine Society, sitting at the intersection of technology and healthcare, the example I always come up with is, you say validation to all of the different stakeholders who are participating. Everyone thinks something different. Until we have a common language, until we can communicate across different disciplines, we're going to be at an impasse. We're going to be inefficient. And the education piece too, I gave earlier the example of a terrific product team coming to the table, but not really understanding what it means to do human subjects research. It's not A/B testing anymore. So what's an IRB? Who are FDA? How do I work with them? What sort of flavor of product do I have? Thinking about things like bias in data. If you're a clinical expert, really providing that education. That's the second prong of what we're doing. And we have a fantastic already curriculum, if you like, of webinars and educational activities we've done and coming down the pike. And then the third piece, and sometimes I think this sounds like the softest piece, but I think it might be the most important, is this idea of community building. And I think it's important for 2 reasons. One, for sort of sharing information, for finding collaborators, all of the typical reasons, but also because I have this utopian idea that one day digital medicine will be one of the many ways that we can provide better healthcare and actually support better health. But we need to be thoughtful about how we're developing algorithms, making sure they're not biased, how we're protecting data. And there's a lot of behavioral economics that tells us that if you have a thriving community that people really feel accountable to, we're much less likely to have deviant behavior. So we really want to set a high bar, define digital medicine as a field, welcome people to the fold, and say that we operate on a high ethical level. We require evidence, and really make that the status quo in this new field.
And as you talk about that, it strikes me that that community aspect, given the sort of distributed nature, must be in digital form. I mean, you're all over the place, and you're essentially providing some of the tool sets to help facilitate that in the production of these curriculum, the white papers, the published reports, and so forth. How are you doing that?
So there's a couple of different tools, and you're right, they're almost all digital. We have had a few sort of meetups and things, and they have been wonderful when they've happened. But to welcome people from 24 different countries, we're not going to do that in person and be effective. So you're right, all of our educational offerings are digital. You can participate in real time. If, for example, a couple of weeks ago, the director of the cybersecurity unit at CDRH was answering questions from our members, but you can also listen to that afterwards. All of our work groups our research work groups are done using electronic tools. They're done virtually, and similarly all of those sort of one-on-one communications are done virtually. For example, we have I think over 600 of our members have signed on to the DIME Slack workspace. About 400 of them access it every single working day. It's at first I was worried that it wouldn't catch on, but in fact, I have learned so much from our colleagues, asking questions, sharing ideas, sharing their own work products. There are sort of spin-off channels where folks are collaborating organically on topics that are most important to them. It's been extraordinary. And our sort of tagline is, digital medicine is the future, build it with us. And, honestly, that's what this community is doing. It's absolutely, they absolutely extraordinary, the commitment and the passion our members have for intentionally building this field.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. So it's maybe worth just mentioning that the Digital Medicine Society is at dimesociety.org. We'll put that in the show notes. Any parting words before we close out?
Thank you for sharing the URL, dimesociety.org. The only parting comment is we won't get a second chance to build this field from the ground up. We have so much technology at our fingertips and so much potential, and we really do welcome folks from every single background who's passionate about getting this right, and hope many of your listeners will join us, Nick.
So, to be clear, join now, join immediately, click the button in the link below. Jennifer, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Nick. This was terrific.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, #TheIncrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.